So as you can see here, we've got the amateur performer on the left and the elite performer on the right, who are both starting in what we call the preliminary phase of shot put. So as you can see, both athletes are stood right over their base, nice straight tall position, and both of their focuses are forwards. As you can see there from the elite performer, he has a nice straight arm compared to the amateur performer, whose arm is slightly off centre, could be a lot straighter. So now moving into the T position, you can see here with the elite performer and here with the amateur performer. So with the elite performer, you can see a clear correlation between shoulders and hips, with almost the ankle being as high, compared to the amateur performer on the left, where you can see there's a clear diagonal line showing that she's not straight. You can also see from the elite performer that his arm is down compared to the amateur performer, who is pointing forwards. By having that arm down, once the technique develops, more torque will be gained from this, which I'll explain later on. You can also see from the elite performer that his focus is very much down to the ground compared to the amateur performer on the left, who you can see her seems to be more diagonal. Now moving into the next phase, which is the crouch position. So here you can see this from the amateur on the left and the elite on the right. Again, you can see with the focus, the elite's focus is still down, it hasn't changed, as well as the amateurs, which hasn't changed, however is still looking more forwards than down. However, positive of this is that you can see how nice and tightly coiled the amateur performer is, as well as this within the elite performer. Now, I mentioned before the arm here, you can see Hannah's on the left is bent into her body. By having that straight arm, as you carry on through the motion, that arm will allow you to gain more torque by bringing the arm across the body. This just allows for a better performance. When we watch the elite performer, you can see they almost make an S shape where they rise up, followed by they will dip slightly down to follow back up again, which if I show you, there's the dip down and the rise back up. You can also see this slightly with the amateur performer. You can see there is a slight lift followed by a slight dip and back up again, although this is nowhere near as obvious as the elite performer. The reason for following this technique is it allows a greater force from the legs to generate more force once the shot is thrown. Now moving on to the next phase of the shot put technique, which is called the shift. Now this is where you can see here we move back towards the line, and again with the elite performer that shift from 1 foot to 2. Now as you can see with the elite performer, if I just move it back this way, the whole time you can see his shoulders still stay very square right until the last minute, which if we take this from the amateur performer on the left, you can see that quite early she starts to rotate her shoulders. This means she won't be able to gain enough power from her legs to perform an efficient shot. So I've now moved the videos on into the next stage of the shot put technique, which is the power position. You can see here that both athletes have their weight on their back foot, and although it's not completely clear on the video, you can still make out that the elite performer is still looking down compared to, you can see here that the amateur performer is more or less looking completely sideways. This tells us that the amateur performer has already started rotating with her shoulders before using her hips first. This means she's losing the force from her legs that allows her to generate a more powerful shot. So now moving into the lift phase of the technique, and you can see here that the head lifts, again here with the elite performer on the right, the focus of the athlete is now very much up, and again you can see this with the amateur performer on the left. I can see with the elite performer on the right, his non-throwing arm is still very high compared to the amateurs on the left. Using this arm allows the athlete to generate more torque. With the amateur performer not using this, she's therefore generating less torque, meaning less power. A key aspect of this phase is the bow shape that's created with the athlete. Now, looking at the amateur performer on the left, there is very little bow shape compared to the elite performer on the right. Another key point to notice is that with the elite performer here, his hips are very much facing forwards, but if you look to the amateur performer on the left, you can still see a slight rotation facing away from the front, meaning that she's not fully utilised this power in her legs, and therefore hence why her shot is a lot less powerful than the elite performers. Now moving on to the last phase, the second to last phase, of the shot put technique, which is the arm strike, which is just here on the amateur performer and here on the elite. Now you can see from both images here that the throwing arm elbow is nice and high, which clearly indicates that they've pushed through the shot rather than thrown it. And the last phase of the shot put technique is the release, and this is the very last section of the shot put technique. Now, as you can see, if I forward on the amateur performer's throw, there's no rotation there as she's released the shot, showing that there isn't much torque. If we then watch the elite performer on the right here, you can see that he's generated so much torque that he's actually bent over his body, that arm has followed through. So in order to improve this, we've come up with some drills that we want to develop the torque width of the amateur performer so that she can gain more force and therefore throw a more powerful shot.